million soldiers. At the time of Jesus, there was a world census, and the population of the whole planet wasn't very large. We don't know exactly what it was, but 2 million, an army of 2 million would be unfathomable when the book of Revelation was written. However, we're told that in Revelation 9 that the army that crosses the river Euphrates exceeds 200. Now the number of the army of the horsemen was 200 million. First of all, notice the number, 200 million. Secondly, notice they're on horse. Why are they on horse? Well, I suspect there's trouble in the Middle East, and they're not exporting oil anymore, and they're forced to go back to riding on a horse. But that's pure speculation. The Laodicean church of today. Now, you probably belong to the Church of Philadelphia, which is the one church, one of the 7 churches, which Jesus says has no criticism whatever. But Jesus has a huge amount of criticism for the Laodicean church. All right? There are lots of Bible scholars who say that the 7 churches represent 7 church ages. And this is what Jesus said about the Laodicean church. Because you are lukewarm and neither cold nor hot, I will vomit you out of my mouth. Because you say, I am rich, have become wealthy, and have need of nothing, but do not know that you are wretched, miserable, poor, blind, and naked. All right? Now, the characteristics of, I live in the United Kingdom, the characteristics of churches in the United Kingdom is they don't Bible. They think they're very wealthy and they've got large congregations, but they don't believe the Bible. And in fact, Jesus counsels them to put on clothes of salvation. And by the way, these churches don't normally ask me to speak in their churches. Most churches do not take the Bible seriously. They say nothing about salvation, judgment, hell, abortions, sex outside marriage, the occult, all sorts of other things like that. They think they're doing fine, but Jesus doesn't. Now we're going to look at more specific times pointing to our generation. We're in 2009 now, and I want to look very specifically at specific things, events that have happened probably in your lifetime, and certainly in my lifetime. I'm 63 now. I was born in 1948, and this event happened in 1967, well within my lifetime, all right? In AD 33, Jesus prophesied the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem. This is what he said. Jesus left the temple and was walking away when his disciples came up to him to call his attention to its buildings, and Jesus said, and they said, do you see all these things? He asked. I tell you the truth, said Jesus, not one stone here will be left on another. Every one will be thrown down. Jesus is prophesying the destruction of the Jerusalem. And he said they will fall by the edge of the sword and be led away captive to all nations. That was actually fulfilled in AD 70. Many of you know that when the Roman Emperor Titus surrounded and destroyed Jerusalem, there were 1.5 million people there. It was a terrible destruction, and Jerusalem was completely destroyed. Now, there would have been some very astute Christians who might have been clever enough to actually work out when the probable destruction of Jerusalem was going to take place. And this is really interesting. If you look at the screen there, it says, remember Jesus prophesied the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 33. That was the crucifixion year. But the New Testament is written in Greek. And Greek, like Latin and Hebrew, is a numeric language. And the numeric value of Jesus Christos is 37. So 33 plus 37 comes to AD 70. I'm not saying they would have all said it's going to happen in AD 70, but the astute ones would have said, well, I wonder if it is going to be in AD 70. Well, nowadays, believers can do the same. We can actually work out a probable timescale as well. But I want you to look at this now. Following the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70, the site was of Jerusalem site was occupied by non-Jews. That's Gentiles. Everybody who's not a Jew is a Gentile. Until a certain date, June 1967, the Six-Day War, when Jerusalem came into the possession of the Jews again. All right? And this is what Jesus said about that particular date. Jesus said, Jerusalem will be trampled by the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. That happened in 1967. All right? But why am I telling you this? Because Jesus said, when these things begin to take place, that's 1967, stand up and lift up your heads because your redemption is drawing near. That's very important because Jesus is saying 1967 is a critical date. when you see this happening, look up, because your redemption is drawing near. Redemption means redeemed from what? The tribulation. Redeemed from the tribulation. Right. Let's, in other words, 1966-7 is a key date. Redemption is drawing near. Now, Gabriel, the angel Gabriel, also said that 1967 was at the time of the end. I'm not going to go through Daniel 8 in detail because it would take too long, but it concerns Alexander the Great. And this information, by the way, comes from a study by David Pawson, who's a fantastic Bible teacher. And in this important prophecy, Gabriel said that 1967 was at the time of the end. Now, what happened was Daniel asked a question of Gabriel. It says, how long will the vision be concerning the daily sacrifice, etc.? And the answer came back, for 2,300 days, then the sanctuary shall be cleansed. Now, in this context, according to David Pawson, those 2,300 days actually means years. And it's referring to the start date when Alexander the Great, who invaded the Perso-Median Empire, crossed the river Granicus in 334 BC. On the top right there, you can see that a book. The title of the book is Granicus 334 BC. That was a big battle. Well, you take that date, 334 BC, you add 2,300 years plus another year to go from BC to AD and come to what date? 1967. That's when the sanctuary would be cleansed. Why am I telling you about this? Because Gabriel said something very important. In Daniel 8, verse 17, Daniel says, so he came near where I stood, and when I came I was afraid and fell on my face, but he said to me, now listen to this part, understand, son of man, that the vision refers to the time of the end. The time of the end. So now we've got Jesus and Gabriel both saying 1967 is at the time of the end, and look up, for your redemption draws nigh. Are you getting interested? I hope you are, because this is really interesting. 1967 is a key date. Now we're going to look now at Jesus' parable of the fig tree. Very important, his parable of the fig tree, and it's not very long, so I'm going to read it all. It's in Matthew 24, verses 32 to 35. Now learn this parable from the fig tree. When its branch has already become tender and puts forth leaves, you know that summer is near. So you also, when you see all these things, know that it is near, even at the very door. Assuredly, I say to you, this generation will by no means pass away till all these things take place. Now, the fig tree isn't referring to a tree. Of course, it's referring to a tree, but this is a parable. In Jeremiah chapter 5, Hosea chapter 2, and Amos chapter 4, it's perfectly clear that the fig tree is the nation of Israel. All right? And the parable of the fig tree is all about the nation of Israel. And what Jesus is saying is that when the fig tree buds and comes into bloom, that within one generation, everything in Matthew 24, Luke 21, Mark 13 will be fulfilled. Everything. That's what he said. Jesus said, learn from the parable of the fig tree. When its branch has already become tender, we're going to see when that happened, and puts forth leaves, you know that summer is near. Let's look at this little by little, all right? First of all, the budding of the fig tree, part 1. Actually, that happened in November the 29th, 1947. Jesus said the branch would become tender. There's a fig tree. It hasn't got leaves yet. It's got little buds. That's what they look like. Now, here is the budding of the fig tree. It happened on November the 29th, 1947, and that was resolution number 181 to establish the Jewish state of Israel. The United Nations resolution number 181. All right? So the budding of the fig tree happened, on November the 29th, 1947. Now we're going to look at the budding of the fig tree part 2, which is when that tree gave forth leaves. Jesus talked about giving forth leaves. Now, when does a nation become a nation? When it's got borders and a government, all right? Well, when did that happen? That happened on May the 14th,